Did you live through it? And we're live. Welcome, everybody. We're the Bevry community here for open collaboration and discussion. I'm John Buck. I'm joined with pleasure. Oh, I was hearing the feedback from the interview. Oh gosh, it's in 2 tabs. Oh my god. Okay, there we go. Okay, I'm John Buck. I'm here with Pleasure of Doubt, or Brett, and also Nicholas from this channel. You guys have seen him before. And also off camera, we have Tyler and also Craig Reed. Hey, guys.
Hello.
Hey, everyone.
Hi.
All right, and today we're going to be discussing John Vervaeke's 38th lecture. I think it's called like Agape and the 4 E's of cognitive science. Yeah. And so, yeah, we're going to be discussing that, and we'll try to get right into, I guess, the meat of the discussion. And if we need to, we can kind of, since there wasn't too many like point-by-point topics that was going on, there's kind of the 4 E's of cognitive science that he went through, and then kind of, I don't know, side topics besides those. I don't know, Brett, you want to give us a bit of a starting foundation that we can kind of work off of for everybody?
Sure. So he's continuing now to move towards his religion that's not a religion, and sort of filling out his sort of secularization of this resolution to the meaning crisis that he's been setting out. And so he's been trying to build this framework where enlightenment is, it basically enacting a set of what he calls psychotechnologies, or, basically mental techniques to help redress what he calls these perennial problems, which are basically suffering. So that by engaging in these psychotechnologies, you can alleviate suffering. And that is what he is reframing as enlightenment. And so what he's continuing to do with this lecture is to go through the ways. He's trying to get a little more practical in the ways in which we can do this. So he's trying to frame, so he wants to frame these set of psychotechnologies within a worldview that he would probably call a secular worldview. Now, and he mentioned there's he's not the only, first he goes out of his way to, I think he's nervous about being identified as like the leader, or that this is his movement. He wants us to know that there are other people who are working on these type of things. He mentions Rafe Kelly, who's trying to bring together some sort of parkour and martial arts, and Michael Nathan, who's also training in the wisdom within martial arts. So he's saying, he's trying to bring together, various people who are doing this stuff to try to move forward in developing this religion that's not a religion. Now, he spent a lot of time talking about the loss. So the meaning crisis, one of the big things of it, it's caused by the loss of these 3 orders that I think come from Aristotle and Aquinas and so on. So the nomenological order, which is your deep sense of coherence and connectedness; the normative order, which is your sense of significance and depth through self-transcendence; and then the narrative order, which gives a sense of purpose or direction. So he's saying that he spent a lot of lectures where he's described what he calls the loss of these orders. And for his project to be successful, his project has to bring back those orders, or at least address them in a coherent way.
Mm-hmm. Or at least like bringing back what was provided via those orders. So like as he goes into, he's kind of rejecting the very notion of a narrative order due to, for one, the inability of evolution to sort of provide such a narrative order, being this open-ended process rather than a eschatological linear timeline for a beginning, middle, and end. He's trying to provide a system that doesn't even have that commonly brought about or commonly accepted narrative order within most religions that are religions.
Yeah, well, it's strange because like he spent a lot of time going over just how useful these narratives are, but he also spent a lot of time going over how these narratives have gone awry. So, the Nazis, for example, the communists, and
Mhm.
and even within the religions where they've been sort of co-opted, and they can be used to great effect, but then they can lead to a tremendous amount of bloodshed. So
Mm.
so I think he recognizes the utility of them, but I think he's judged them to be dangerous, and he's looked for a way. Now we've sort of gone out of order. We're sort of at the end, but that,
Yeah. Okay, but
that's
that at
okay.
least makes more sense for because
Yeah.
he talks about how he's not wanting to fall into the utopian trap of
Right.
trying to build up this utopia. And that makes a lot of sense of why he's very wary of narratives then, because that you can fall into that trap if you have this grand narrative.
Yeah, like my instinct in part is, I mean, these narratives are useful. They're a great way to communicate these patterns. And so we should be looking to either co-opt old ones or write new ones. But I guess just being careful to avoid the problems of utopia. I mean, I think that can be done in a way, if you're careful, where you're saying, hey, these are stories that are meant to portray patterns. The problem is, and I think Tyler probably has thoughts on this, is that they tend to get co-opted by people who may have less, more power-oriented goals, and who may not be quite as geared towards addressing the meaning crisis and are looking towards, consolidating their power. And so whatever narratives we come up with, somebody may just take over, and suddenly we're back to dogma.
Mm-hmm. Do either Nick or Craig or Tyler, you want to kind of I don't know, while we're on the topics of the three orders? So it was what, nomological, narrative, and what was the other one?
And sorry, I'm going back up in my notes, and normative. So I mean, we can go first. I mean, did you want to go in order? Like, he actually ends with narrative, but if we want to go in order, he starts off by talking about the deep sense of connectedness, so the nomological order, which is so it's interesting. He talks about Susan Wolf's work, and what she had said is the way people have traditionally seen meaning is that what they're saying is they want subjective attraction, so I guess attraction from themselves, meaning to find salience, to have something be important to them, to objective attractiveness, so that the thing in itself is objectively worthy of attractiveness.
Yeah,
but
this
like you
deep
just said,
interconnectedness between where your map matches to the territory of what you're going towards.
well, but like you just said, he spent a lot of time showing that the things don't have an inherent meaning. They don't have an inherent essence. It's the relationship between us and the object that creates the meaning, rather than the object having inherent meaning itself. So that we have to sort of that maybe we don't have to look at things as objectively valuable, but look at what makes it valuable to us, I think, is sort of what he's saying.
Yeah, go ahead, Craig.
The deep sense of connectedness is kind of the whole point of the meaning crisis. Like when people are in religious traditions, spiritual traditions, and they're raised in them, those spiritual traditions are really important to them, and they give them, I mean, some people would say artificially, depending on your point of view, but they give you a deep sense of connectedness, and they help you to answer what he's calling the perennial problems, like the temporalness of life, things like that. The meaning crisis, how I hear the meaning crisis, I could be wrong about this, but I've always took it as that's kind of the meaning crisis in a nutshell. When you strip these meta narratives away, then you have people floating around without any real deep sense of connectedness to life. And that's what he's trying to replace in a more like scientifically authentic way. Is that a good way to say?
And I think he's also, I think, not critique, but noted historically, the religions have gotten away from implementing a lot of the psychotechnologies that previously, spawned and helped develop relevance realization and this sense of deep connectedness. And and he talked a lot about the Protestant Reformation, and how it got rid of sort of a lot of the monasteries, and so it was much more individualistic and got rid of that the tradition. So it was not just
all these institutions that were kind of like there for the people themselves could now be like outsourced to all the secular kind of communities of the market or the education system, things like that.
Right, but that's part of what the meaning crisis is, because you outsource these things from religious institutions. And yeah, there were flaws in religious institutions, dogmatism, things like that. But then you need to replace some of what those religions or those spiritual traditions were providing. And that's what I think his project actually is.
Yeah.
Right? Trying to replace that in a way that's more scientifically authentic and kind of zeroing in on, he used what you just said about subjective being in relationship to the objective. I mean, that's debatable, but that's how he sees it. It's debatable, his premise there, but that's how he sees it.
Right. Yeah, that's the other thing that like I'm still skeptical / wary of is whether his solution to the deep need for interconnectedness to reality can be kind of sidestepped with his transjective way of explaining this interconnectedness. So like if the typical understanding is like there has to be this objective value, and that's what, like, I'm evaluating this thing because it has the objective value. People have objective value, and that's why I'm treating them with deep respect, things like that. Or objects as well. Like they have some sort of inherent value to the objects themselves, like sacred stones or religious icons, things like that. His, I guess, solution to that, because the scientific revolution is kind of torn down that way of looking at the world, where there isn't this sort of value-ness inherent to the objects themselves, is by
right. But he's kind of trying to rebuild it, I would say.
Right.
I don't think he's being nihilistic and saying isn't any real meaning.
Oh yeah, from his perspective,
he's deconstructing it, but he's also trying to reconstruct it at the same time.
Right. That's how I see it. From his perspective, is like people were mistaken as to what was providing this sense of value. Like we were misattributing it to the objects themselves, when in fact the source of meaning making or value was through this transjective relevance realization system. I don't know, where it's not inherent exactly within ourselves. It's not like we're just projecting meaning onto the thing, and it's not that meaning itself is imparting itself into our heads. It's rather through our interaction with our environment, there is this, I guess, emergent, like that might be a way to explain his understanding of relevancy as being this almost emergent property of through interaction and reshaping in this kind of cyclical system.
I mean, I guess sorry, go ahead.
That's a good point, because one of my questions was, again, kind of revolving around this essentialism, but it seems, and he does address it in kind of really light-handed ways without ever really answering it, I've noticed, but it seems like there's some type of essentialism in his transjective frame, which is to say that there's something essential about the nature of the way the subjective and objective relate to each other that allows us to trust that process without giving some sense of authority to the subjective or the objective. And this reminds me very much of like the Christian Imago Dei, right? It's like, well, how does a sinful creature, or right within the mythology, how does a sinful creature, and thus one incapable of perceiving or properly interacting with, truth, goodness, and beauty, how do they recognize those things at all? And the idea is, right, well, you're made in the image of God. Some part of you responds to, the aspect of God imbued in creation itself. And we have labeled these attributes, truth, goodness, and beauty.
Yeah, I agree, and that's why I think it's weird, because you would think a lot of Christians might get tripped out by him, but I find him really, really empathetic. His whole approach is empathetic to the Christian worldview. Like, I can listen to him really easily without ever skipping a beat and going like, oh, I can't get with that. Like, it's kind of a very empathetic, sympathetic take, or he's at least has got a lot of I don't know, a lot of kinship with people who are actually religious and how he approaches things. And I think he does kind of see an essentialism. It's a weird sort of way of framing it, but I think it's there. Like, I forget the word you just used, the transgentle.
Yeah, transjective. Like, he brings up this term.
Right. It's not
almost,
subjective. It's not objective.
Yeah.
It transcends both. But it's but that's kind of a religious idea. I mean, that's kind of a like.
Yeah, that was interesting. He actually used the word transcendent in regards to
exactly
the relevancy realization.
Right. Well, then what he does is he brings in the concept of agape in what I think is sort of a weird way. Now, maybe I haven't quite understood it, but
before we get into that, I want to try and get a better understanding of what you mean, Nick, by saying he's still kind of like sneaking in a bit of essentialism, because at least the way that I'm interpreting him, I'm not seeing what the object is in which he's like saying this has an essence. It's almost like the essence is something outside of any object to like locate the essence within.
Certainly. And I think that's why he does. I'm trying not to be too uncharitable here, but it seems like he's doing a very good job of hiding his essentialism, right? He's good at taking old concepts and then disguising them in new language to give us a different perception of them, which is very useful, so long, I think, as we're also transparent with it. But I guess my point, or to try and answer your question, it seems like he's how do you put it? It seems like there's something about the nature of right, it's
the interactions that causes it.
Yes, right. It's like PVK used to say about Jordan Peterson, right? Meaning is his sacrament. And right, there's something.
Are you saying that by him saying sort of relevance realization is inherently valuable, that he's being essentialist about it? Is that?
Yeah. Well, even the way you describe that, inherently valuable.
So the way I understand him saying it is that it's inherently valuable because it is the way in which we value anything. So
sure, but that doesn't dodge essentialism.
Yeah, I don't.
Right, goodness
I never quite
is
understood
right. You can create these circular definitions all day long, right?
Right. The machinery responsible for all this up here. Why is this not the most sacred thing possible?
Well, that's sort of what he's suggesting with saying we should have an agapic view towards this machinery and the system of psychotechnologies that help reinforce that machinery.
I want a little gold chain with a little iconic brain and a vat on my at the end there. A little trinket, maybe a little. What do they call those? Charm bracelets.
It's generally why trees are such a common sacred symbol. Replicate the nervous system.
Well, wait, hold on. So put aside the label of essentialism. Are we okay with, like, that seems to make sense that it's inherently valuable because it is the way in which we can value anything. That's not betraying, say, the fact that he also says objects don't otherwise have inherent value. That it's only because it's the grounding of value itself for us.
Oh, I'm not saying that he's dodging essentialism in the sense that truly there is objective value within his frame. I'm saying that he's not dodging essentialism because he's taking that essentialism and then placing it somewhere else, but it still he's placing a tremendous amount of trust in some essential character to this process.
I see. Like, okay, yeah, so he's assuming that because
there's a
this
personality to relevance realization we could bend.
Well, it's funny because that was actually kind of the point that Brett was actually kind of skeptical regarding Vervaeke is that going into Agape, the way he's using Agape is sort of very different from how he's been using Agape previously.
Yeah.
Do you want to get into that, Brett?
Yeah, well, it seems like he's almost trying to, and Craig, you were saying he's, pays homage sort of in a way to Christianity. It's sort of like he's sort of shoehorning in this, Greek/Christian concept of agape into this. Like, I get what he's saying, that relevance realization is essential to our personhood because, even though I think animals and other creatures have relevance realization too, or at least some of them do. They're capable of having salience, that they consider a certain thing. I mean, certainly appreciating a threat, is relevance realization, right?
It's pretty darn relevant.
Yeah.
There's a lion running at you. That seems kind of relevant. There's a lion coming. Yeah, I'd say that's relevant. Right. Let's run.
So I'm not sure why. Like it almost seemed like he was shoehorning this concept in to help make it more palatable to Christians. Like sort of,
or to sacredize relevance realization also. If you can tie agapic love to relevance,
but I think it's sacred without that. I don't think you need to. Like, I think he's made the case that relevance realization is really darn important. And when he said first, like I was with him when he said, we should care about the machinery here because it's so helpful to us, and we should care about everything that goes around.
And where did that machinery come from? Evolution. And where did evolution come from? The being that is no being, the nothing, nothing, God, right? Like, where does it end up? Where does it always end up?
Well, I mean, he would probably argue with that, but yeah.
But that's because that's what I see most relevant at the moment. In this episode in particular, is his emphasis on, or his de-emphasizing the narrative relationship. What that does is it chops off at the very least two polar ends of like a kind of a triune set of questions that we always have. Like, where did I come from? What am I currently doing? And where am I going? Yeah, right. That is always the case. That's what our brains do.
The irony is that he sold me on a lot of this. We've been listening to, we're now on episode 38 of the narrative. So like he's doing all of this through narrative. So I'm not sure why it seemed like a sharp right turn.
That's a very good point. Like his whole framing of the meaning crisis is told via narrative.
Yeah,
like this unfolding
and very
process.
Effectively.
Yeah.
I think he's done a good job of it.
Also, a middle and an end. Right. His project is an attempt at a third quarter of the story.
I mean, classically, like agape love is always meant to sort of like, brotherly love extended into a kind of a spiritual love of everything. I listened to this before we did this. I actually listened to this one over again, and I don't really see where you say that he kind of sounds like you think he's smuggling in like a Christian framing through agape love. That's normally how people mean it. But I didn't hear him do that.
Well, what he's doing is, here's what he said, that when we care to create the conditions of meaning making because we find them inherently valuable, what we're actually engaging in is agape. To love for its own sake, the process of meaning making, the process of being a person ultimately.
Right. And I think the conflict that I'm kind of seeing is when he was first describing agape, it was very much in relation to how you interact with another person to bring them into personhood. Like there was the slaves in ancient Rome, and you treated them like a real person and brought them into your community so that they were another real person. Or you had the same interaction with a child. You bring that child, this kind of lump of crazy wobbly hands and messiness all over, into an actual person, a being who can do the same thing and act and create and all these other things. But the way in which he's using agape now is like, yes, it is still very much that creative process, and it is still sort of like the becoming a person, but it's no longer it's no longer you caring towards another person. It's rather you caring towards a system, almost like a mechanical system.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's very different. Like there's a personal connection that you can have, love, agape, to a person, and then there's it's almost like a category error in a sense to try to use that same agapic love towards something impersonal.
And I don't think we lose anything by saying this is really important and we should care about it. Like that was effective when he said that. I hadn't thought about it in that way before. But then he lost me a sentence later.
Push back a little bit against conflating importance with sacredness. I think that they do different things. Right, there's something very different. For example, characterizing relevance realization as you know, a process of agapic love is very different.
Well, no, hold on. He was saying caring about the machinery of relevance realization is agapic. Not that relevance realization itself is agapic.
Is agapic love.
We should care about relevance realization as an object of agape.
Yeah, so, that's a weird
which is
one.
But this is, I don't think this is very much different than, you know, the kind of Socratic analysis that the greatest life is to be a philosopher, right? To seek wisdom and to love wisdom. That I think that's essentially the same kind of conclusion, right?
Yeah, but it's still different. Like the love of a person, like in a relationship, is different from the love of a
I'm agreeing with your part.
Object or an impersonal.
I don't think it's possible to engage with. All right, so let's say that there is machinery within us that is related to the processes that bring us together in agapic love. Mm-hmm. That machinery certainly cannot be exapted easily or even possibly in the same way to attach itself to this process, right? There's a whole lot of stuff that can't even be. So for instance, for you and I to develop true agapic love, as he is telling us, it has to be embodied, right? There has to be an embodiment. And the very thing he's discussing as attaching to agapic love is disembodied intersubjectivity kind of.
Right. Yeah, because there's nothing to, there's no thingness in which to interact with because he hasn't located it into anything objective.
Right. And to truly be agapic, I think.
Yes, yeah.
To truly be agapic, you have to be willing to be changed by the circumstance, right? The adaptive capacity is a necessary part of it. And the other individual, let's say, the other person in the process also has to be altered in the process. And this is a fundamental quality of the universe. When you alter something, it alters you. And when you know, it's all equal and opposite, let's say. And this is not giving you any purchase with which to alter it. And it can't even really alter you. The only true connection you have with it is in the act that you are altering or being altered by the object that you're attaching it to. Like the bee in the flower, right? Think of the bee in the flower. How do you and I value the flower? Like, why do we value the flower in the same way that a bee does for the same reasons? No, but we certainly find it extremely valuable. And this might be related to Nick's point of the importance and sacredness, right? So like I can look at the color of the flower and enjoy its beauty, but it has nothing to do with pollinating. And in what ways do the bee and the flower shape each other, since they're quite clearly in this like incredible intersubjective tango, right? So what's going on there? I don't see any true mystery in that with which to dive forever, as he's saying. I don't see any perpetually unfolding, disclosing depth to that. It stops there.
I mean, and the thing is, we don't love it for its own sake. We love it because it's really important to us and it helps us function in so many important ways, right? We love it because of relevance realization is important to us because of what it does for us. It's not inherently valuable to us. It's valuable to us because it produces really good results for us. So
in that sense, I think characterizing it as important is more accurate.
Yes,
Because,
yeah.
well, and yeah, to Tyler's point, it's right. The function of the flower, its importance is not what is compelling us to be attracted to it. It's the perception of beauty, right? This transcendent or sacred quality that is partially found in the manifestation of the flower.
And I think like just saying that, I think he's made the case it's important. I think that's why I'm sort of think it's a little cheap, and it sort of turns me off a bit where he sort of is shoehorning agape here. Like I get it, it's related to person making.
Look, I want to take your earlier point and agree with you. I think he did put it in to speak to the Christians, let's say.
I do want to at least say that it seemed almost like his usage of agape is almost offhanded in a sense. Like I think he mentioned it like once or twice during this whole lecture.
And if you go back,
which is weird then that it's titled with.
I think
it too. Yeah.
I think the analogy he's bringing is that relevance realization is agape in that it creates persons and it creates value. It creates things to be valuable. And
but again, remember, he's not saying relevance realization is agape. He's saying we should agape our relationship to relevance realization. We should care about, we should love relevance realization.
Because relevance realization creates persons. Like that's how we have meaning is via relevance realization. That's our meaning making machine.
Right.
And that's how I mean, like he's using it as an analogy or maybe as a direct comparison to agape because it does that thing.
Like I thought he seemed to be trying to sort of shoehorn in a God is love, a secular God is love, but I wasn't convinced by it. But I mean, in a way, it's window dressing because I am convinced. I am convinced by the importance of it. It's just I don't like the framing in terms of agape, but everything else about it, I think he's right on. We should be, focusing on how to improve our relevance realization machinery. Seems like a really good idea. Sorry, Craig, go ahead.
No, it's fine. This could be off, but I because I'm not 100% sure exactly what you're objecting to, but I think this is an analogy. There's this atheist dude, Jeffrey Williams, who on his blog, he starts talking about, he thinks he's being an atheist. He thinks he's an atheist. But if you read his blog, he starts talking about...
There are no atheists. Am I right? There are no atheists.
No, but I mean,
right?
It's really funny because you read his blog and he talks about, who's the Nazi philosopher? Heidegger. Yeah. And he talks about the holiness of life, literally talking about the holiness of life. And I always wanted to, when he listens to my videos, he always talks about spirituality. And he doesn't notice that he's using language that is very religious and has religious spiritual connotations. He's an atheist. He'll tell you, I don't believe in God. But when he starts talking philosophically, he talks about Beethoven. He starts talking about, basically I think that might be what you're kind of objecting to. Like he starts.
No, I'm actually not. That's not it. Like I get what you're saying, and I actually think that actually makes sense. I think it makes sense that I think the spiritual machinery is in it. It is in us. So secular people, it's not our belief in God that makes us have these spiritual experiences. That we're human and we have spiritual experiences, and some people interpret it religiously, spiritually in terms of a God. Other people interpret it other ways, but all people are capable of having these experiences. So that makes sense. What I'm saying is it seems very weird to apply the concept of agape of your love for a process. Right. It just seemed like John said, a category error.
Right, but it didn't seem like, I listened to the lecture and that didn't seem like that big of a part of what was going on in the lecture.
Well, maybe I'm influenced because he titled it that. And yes, I agree.
And I was going to say that he does that a lot. He titles things in ways where I get really excited because I'm like, oh, cool, this is going to really be right up my alley. And then it's like something he vaguely mentions sort of in the lab. Like,
yeah, so you're right. It may have been more of a minor point that I latched onto more because he titled it that, and I thought the whole thing was going to be about agape, which I'm really interested in, and it really wasn't. And so I.
So how do you define agape? How would you define it?
Well, I tend to think of it as the love of a parent for a child, that type of thing. I get like the
nurturing love, growing
nurturing,
love,
caring for them, helping them become self-sacrifice. Exactly. As opposed to filial love, which is more the brotherly love. And then, eros. Which
And
is
see,
considered
that
love.
makes sense as like a transjective thing because it's between two persons. Like there's this
Right.
actual like bonded relationship that you can have. But if you're like, you can't exactly have this almost agapic relationship between an object and a person, but only
okay,
between.
wait.
Right. And if
There
he actually
is-
was saying I'm agape for the realization, the relevance realization project, that's a little off. And I get why.
Yeah.
That's a little
Yeah.
lame. It's like,
Yeah, and I don't think he's
I
saying
love
that.
the relevance realization.
No, but
project.
I think he is saying that. I think he's specifically saying that, which is why I think it's so weird.
Yeah,
But,
'cause
okay, he also directly ties, if I remember correctly, that the rest of that sentence is him then saying that relevance realization and personhood are the same thing.
Yeah, or that it's intrinsic to our personhood, which I also
More,
disagree
I
with
think he did it even
because, yeah.
stronger than that. He said even
Yeah,
like
hold on.
realizing relevance is what personhood is, right? That is the mechanism, not even the mechanism. It is, how do we put it? It's the
Like we ascribe
verb
personhood.
behind the noun.
Like we ascribe personhood to anything that can have relevance realization. It's something kind of like that. Like anything that has relevancy realization within it
No, he
has
says it
some aspect
weirdly.
of personhood.
He says the process of being a person ultimately. So he sort of roundabouts it, but I agree. It's a weird thing. Like, again, I think animals and even probably insects have at least some degrees of relevance realization. So I don't know why we link it to personhood, although we use it in our personhood, but it's about salience. It's about what's important to us. And
well, remember, like I think his use of the word personhood is in regards to like a moral personhood rather than like a human. Like he's not saying this is what makes us human. This is what makes us persons. Like something with an I, some sort of like spark of divinity or something like within us, something of value and evaluations or evaluating making or of some sort.
well, see, his next sentence makes much more sense, where he's saying that's why the things that contribute the most to meaning in our lives is our sense of being connected to other people agapically. So we should be cultivating realization, appreciation of agape. And that makes sense. But agape towards other people.
Right. Okay. So yeah, this is really interesting then, because like if what makes a person is the ability to have relevancy realization, then to treat relevancy realization as if it was a person would be incorrect, because unless relevancy realization itself has some sort of personhood or is able to like see things as salient.
He's smuggling God.
You just connected it, buddy. That's exactly the point that Vanderklay made to him, by the way. I'm pretty sure he made it in different words. But yeah, that's it.
It's like I don't think he thinks that relevancy realization has any sort of personhood to it, but it is, at least if we're understanding it properly, it's if we treat relevancy realization as if it had a personhood, then we would be like making him like almost like erecting some sort of false idol of some sort, or like interacting in an improper way.
Here's where the analogy sort of works. So he says to agapically love a person or to people is not just to be directed at the body and mind, is to be directed at the conditions of community, environment, development, and education. So in another way, we could say to agapically love relevance realization is to really focus on the community aspects, the systemic aspects, the structural aspects, the psychotechnologies, developing the system and the economy and the ecology to help develop it. So I get that sort of, I see it as an analogy, but it's...
I want to bring up, I don't think he said that we should agapically love relevancy realization. He said we should value it and hold it as being important. But I don't...
Right, but then he said that's agape.
No, he wants to love it. Pleasure does, right?
He says
he's getting gay for relevance realization, John.
Here's what he says: when we care to create the conditions of meaning making because we find them inherently valuable, what we're actually engaging in is agape.
Right.
To love for its own sake the process of meaning making.
Yeah.
The love for its own sake. Yeah.
R. Johnny sitting in the tree.
Which I get it. I get it as an analogy, but but it doesn't. It's sort of
It's weak. Yeah, it's weak.
agapic-like. Yeah, it's weak. Yeah.
Mhm.
But sometimes he'll say things that don't quite.
Yeah. I don't want to be overly harsh because I agree with the whole point. Like the overall point, I like it. Just it's like when you have a great piece of cake and then there's this aftertaste, and you're like, just ruined it.
Yeah, and it seems like the problem is that he would directly have to, right? If you're going with the traditional form of agapic love, it is specifically that which happens between persons, however we might then define persons. But right, this is quite literally why agapic love is a quality of God as a personhood. Right. So it seems like what he's trying to do is replace that dynamic relationship found in, older forms of religion. And he's trying to close the loop down into something smaller where he doesn't have to appeal to the larger personhood. And he seems to be flirting right on the edge, if not actually, falling into making the process of relevance realization right, a pseudo god.
Gnosis.
Yeah.
Right. That's what he ended up with, right? This process of gnosis, of loving, it's all bound up in a whole bunch of different phrases that he keeps using over and over again. Loving wisdom, loving the seeking of wisdom, loving the relevance realization, all of that stuff. It's
interesting that he's so eager to embrace gnosis, which, as he's recognized, has led to some pretty terrible things as well with the Gnostics. But with narrative, for the same reason, he's willing to get rid of it. So it's odd that his fear of narrative going bad means he wants.
What's the gnosis that led to terrible things? Just out of curiosity.
Like anti-Semitism, for example.
Well, within the Gnostics, it was the secret knowledge that you had that kind of like revealed the undergirding of evilness.
I thought you were
reality.
Referring to something specific.
Well, it was the Yahweh is the demiurge, and who are the people who worship the demiurge? It's the Jews, and so that's specific. Evil, and the Jews are therefore worshiping evil.
That's more connected to Gnosticism. Like the way he's using gnosis is just, at least it seems to me, is a embodied set of practices that are fitted, I guess, alongside of our wisdom.
But in the same way, it's that structure that went bad in certain ways. So narrative can be very valuable too, but it can go bad. Gnosis can be very valuable, but it can also go bad. But he's jettisoning one while embracing the other.
Well, I definitely understand how Gnosticism can go bad. And in fact, I think it's kind of bad at its core. But that's kind of different from how he uses the word gnosis, I think, because
you're saying there's no intrinsic relationship between gnosis and Gnosticism.
I don't think so. At least not the way that he's using gnosis.
No, John's right. Gnosticism
that makes sense. That makes sense.
Specific. What you're talking about, the demiurge, Yahweh's the demiurge. Yeah. That's a specific, almost a religion or almost a cult-like religious idea that grew up. Gnosis is a general term that means I don't even
participatory. It's participatory knowing, sort of.
Right.
Yeah. And that seems to be the way that he's using it. I don't know if it has any inherent connection.
That's fair enough. That's fair enough.
Yeah.
But just, the Gnostics were just a group that happened to value gnosis, but also had some pretty bad ideas.
Well, all right. So I want to point out something related to cognitive science and related to the way that McGilchrist's analysis talks about the hemispherical relationship in the brain, because it's the right hemisphere that keeps track of all this stuff happening in the world, all this crazy chaos. It's the thing that layers all the images and stories on top of each other. And when you stack all of those eons of stories on top of each other and look through it in a particular way, the themes lay up on top of each other, and those are your archetypes.
Yeah, I think there's a tight overlap between his use of religio and McGilchrist's work with the right hemisphere. Yeah.
Okay, so this whole thing, this machinery is devoted to that exact process. And yet he spends so much time saying downplaying the relevance of maintaining narrative and using narrative in the process of creating relevance realization, that it can be manipulated quite easily. And I think it's primarily born out of the analysis that the current narrative is in disagreement with science, right? So the current religious narrative seems to disagree with science. Therefore, we have to downplay narrative because
but why not suggest new narratives, like instead of jettisoning narrative altogether? Right?
I kind of agree, and I think that's what I'm pointing out, that there's a bit of a contradiction there. We noted it, that he's got 50 episodes of narrative essentially.
Yeah. So so that's interesting. Like the narrative structure itself is what lends meaning or lends relevancy to those who.
It's a pattern delivery system.
Right.
It's a way that makes it really easy for just the average person to internalize and participate in these patterns.
Not the average person, for all people.
All people. Well, sure, all people.
Not just, and it has nothing to. Okay, listen.
I meant, yeah, sure.
No, even at Vervaeke's highly developed cognitive level, okay, they have narratives within academia. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. But I think Brett's point is that within religions, the narrative structure is such that it can work for the lowest common denominator, as well as for those of the highest kind of tiers of
very effectively. It's a very effective delivery method of message and pattern.
Vervaeke's pointing out that he doesn't think that it's available as a meaning-making system for the people at the top. That's in fact his claim, that if you want to agree with science at the same time, you have to dispense with your religion, and that's part of what he's doing.
But it's so, like,
that's why it's a religion that's not a religion.
But it's so integrated into serious play and ritual, which he spent so much time talking fondly of. Like I don't, and symbology, like spent so much time talking about symbols, which is all about narrative. So it seems like I felt it was like a sharp left turn, where suddenly he's jettisoning something that he spent so much time building up. Like
he didn't deal with it in any meaningful way, which is kind of, I've noticed this again a couple times, where it's like he recognizes a weak point, and then it's almost like he claims, like, look, here's the weak point, and then he just moves on. Like here, like he doesn't develop a fix for it. It's just, and then we're kind of put in the position where, like we're talking about right now, where we're going, oh, well, is he just throwing narrative away? And it's like, well, no, obviously not, because his entire delivery system is
but he talks about this post-narrative system.
I want to use my relevance realization pattern recognition machinery, if you don't mind. In his adoption of the use of the word agape, I think the rightfully noted kind of disjointed use of it is because he's paying attention to YouTube. He's paying attention to the discussion going on. And he is, as you can see, and as he's explicitly stating, he's trying to help shepherd that discussion in the right way. So he's doing a couple of different things. He's trying to attract a certain type of audience. That's why he goes to the comment section on all the different, Vanderklay videos. And that's why he's reaching out to Pajot and all these people. And then he is altering his language a tad to speak with them in their language, right? So to adopt the use of agape is to adopt the use of a kind of shibboleth for that community. If you know what a shibboleth is, it's a word or a phrase or a ritual that indicates you're part of that group. And I think I'm going to point out this other interesting thing. Just a couple of weeks before that episode was recorded, let's say, I'm not sure exactly when it was recorded, but I've got a pretty good guess. Rebel Wisdom released a video that was a conversation between Jamie Wheel, Daniel Schmachtenberger, and Jordan Hall, or Green Hall, whatever he wants to go by. And in it, they made claims like we need to stop being something that was like narrative telling monkeys, storytelling monkeys.
Okay. Is that connected to their game A? Because I know Jordan Greenhall and Vervaeke are somewhat closely connected between each other, because like I think they have had 3 conversations now, at least publicly, that are up there.
Well, they're doing a lot of work together. His latest Q&A, Vervaeke said that they have videos that they've yet to release, and that there's a lot of stuff that's going to be brought
Okay,
out.
so yeah, it's kind of a good point made by both Tyler and Brett, that with narrative, that's kind of like the thing that we use to ground our meaning making, really. Like sure, you can have your, like, the way in which that Vervaeke seems to be trying to step away from narrative is by, I guess, relying upon these higher states of consciousness, or at least like doing a similar thing as the higher states of consciousness, where when you have these types of experiences, you don't have any sort of narrative, but yet you're still in this kind of point of ecstasy, that you're still, it's like proving a point that you can exist without narrative.
Well, and the problem though is those higher states of consciousness are not for the average person. They're hard to get into, right?
Right.
So that would be like, it's great for the people who can get there, but the
And it's
vast
also-
majority of people are never
And it's
gonna
also
get
kind of a problem if you're trying to build a society, because like
Well-
you can have your like monk that lives off in a cave
Mhm.
having all these higher states of consciousnesses, but you still need an army to protect that border, and you still need farmers and things like that. You can't just have the entire village being beggars for food from each other, because everybody's just living in a
Also, the
yeah.
only way to communicate these higher states of consciousness is through narrative. And that is because you can't actually they're outside of the realm of words, right? They become encoded in the person's living of life itself. So that's why we look at how the Buddha lives along with what he says, and we get this picture, right? A narrative of what a higher state of consciousness actually acts and feels like in the world. And again, that's because there's no it's the most lossless way to encode what is happening there, right? If we try and break the person's life into propositional statements, we start making errors, right? And then these errors build and pile up over many iterations.
Right,
until we're
and
in a meaning crisis.
He's not trying to return to propositional statements as our basis for meaning making.
Yeah,
that's for
but
sure.
Again, I guess what I'm saying is, yeah, we're trapped within narrative, and particularly even if you don't want to say we're trapped in it, you do have to admit at some level that the most effective mode of communication is through narrative, like just from a purely functional standpoint.
Totally.
I was convinced where he was been going this whole time on the narrative aspect was to just have a non-dogmatic approach to narrative, where we're just not taking it as history. We're taking it as mythology, which is designed to help identify patterns and help deliver them. And it's okay to just see them that way and not be too attached to them as the truth, but truth in a more practical way. I was convinced that's where he was going, even when he said, you know, we may have the need for symbols and stories to afford this, but we don't have to think of them as existing independently in the structure of reality. That makes sense to me. We don't have to think of these narratives as fundamental in a historical way, but they're very useful. But then he did that turn to, okay, let's look at post narrative. No,
but we do have to think of them as real. And like really real in an existential way, if not in a historical. Yeah, I think it's important. There has to be a touchstone to that.
They allow us to note patterns without even realizing we're noting patterns.
Yeah,
you know, there's a subconscious way of noting patterns, of deep patterns. When these stories, these themes in these stories come up over and over again, it's because these are patterns that people see, even if they don't even realize they're picking it up in that way. And that's like their Jordan Peterson and his archetype. You know, that's
there's this Jewish screenwriter, or actually he's a playwright, David Mamet. He has this quote. I think it's from him. It might be he was quoting somebody else. That the Bible is not about what has happened, but it's about what is always happening. And it's like, by having these kinds of stories, we can see ourselves in them and use those as our model for how to interact with the world. And because we have our whole, like if we're within a culture or a group that all have these same stories, we can know how to interact with each other too, and like help each other through doing what we know is correct.
Also, to your point, pleasure of doubt, are you familiar at all with Joseph Campbell?
I mean, I know a little bit of. I'm not.
He's well known for the whole hero myth. Spelling that out, right? He was an anthropologist, studied all these crazy mythologies all throughout the world, looked for the common patterns, and
he was Jordan Peterson before there was Jordan Peterson.
Exactly.
And actually, pleasure of doubt, you should check out on Netflix. I'm pretty sure it's still there. The Power of Myth. It's like a 4-part. One of those episodes is really good. It's really interesting. Two of them, you'll like some of what he has to say. He sounds very Peterson-esque and erudite sometimes, and then he sounds like a total woo artist at other times.
And what I kind of wanted to bring up there was that what he ended up settling on, and again, he's a large figure within the kind of formation of or solidification of the New Age, right? He's very present within a lot of what those people went on to build. But what he ended up settling on as the answer to this problem of trying to both preserve narrative and recognizing the extreme importance of myth while also trying to dodge the pitfalls that go along with overly believing in a narrative, was he basically went about everyone should design and create their own religion in the form of archetypal symbols, right? Find something that's extremely relevant to you, right? He was a scholar, right? He loved reading. So he created a god of scholarship. And right, he draws him. He makes a little shrine to him. It's this almost recreation of a personal paganism in a sense.
What a very I was just kind of thinking, like, what a very Western Western prescription, just because that's a prescription that can only really be made within a culture where an individualism is so highly honored and respected. Like we have the capability now of, like, we live in a society in which anybody could kind of have their own religion and still be able to get by just fine.
My childhood deities would have destroyed my parents' deities, like from year 5. Okay, from year 5, we would have been at eternal war, right? Like, Enkidu, you are going to, like, it would have been real nasty. Let me tell you.
Well, and I think it's important to note this solution did not scale. No. Right? No one does what Joseph Campbell recommended. And I think a large part of that was exactly that he did not recognize how myths are principalities, as Jonathan Peugeot might describe it. It's something that arises through the actions of many people rather than something that a person can just manifest on their own.
Yeah, that's true. He was a big influence on Star Wars too.
Yeah. A lot of the stories. Star Wars is the most obvious. But
and like he asked the question, is it possible to move to a post-narrative way of being? I suspect the answer might be no. Or not.
Yeah, I think the answer is no. I think that's fairly obvious. That's what the meaning crisis kind of is these narratives gave people what was the word that he used, coherence, or they gave people structure and meaning and deep attachment in their lives that they could live out within these narrative patterns. And when you strip the narratives away to just propositional knowledge and say therefore they're worthless,
or not even propositional, but even in the sense of practice. Again, he even noted this. I criticized him last time for it, and he noted it. But he even said, right, if you do not have a worldview and you just have a constellation of practices, they'll degrade with time.
Yeah, he said that in this episode.
What prevents that entropy is largely the narrative structure and if not the one you're borrowing, then the one you're creating by acting out the results of the practices.
But here's what he said. We need to talk about the way in which this whole project can be undermined if these sets of practices can't be situated within an encompassing and welcoming worldview. And what's a worldview but a narrative?
Yeah,
right. So
exactly.
So I don't get it. Maybe he just phrased it badly. Like, frankly, I thought he was off this lecture. I thought he was a little less confident, a little more searching for his terms. Like,
I wonder if we're
he was
maybe
weak.
over assuming what he's meaning by kind of like getting rid of narrative. It may be that he's more focused on not having this grand narrative. Like maybe you can have maybe he still understands that mythoses are kind of like necessary to societal cultures to have, but any sort of narrative which is all encompassing will be something that I guess just
that's why I brought up
work
Joseph Campbell, though, was again, Joseph Campbell tried to answer that exact problem, and it was this micro narrative that you are summoning forth through your interaction with existence. And again, you know, I don't know, maybe it worked for some people. It just doesn't seem like a scalable answer.
Yeah.
The thing that I think it was Nick who just said hit on the problem with that is that the reason why, even in different religious traditions, the reasons why these things work and actually help give meaning to people's lives is because the narratives, because they're collective and they develop over years, have archetypal information in them. And that's what Joseph Campbell was pointing to. And now Peterson has grabbed on a more sophisticated version of the same idea. But the archetypal information is the stuff that actually helps you solve the perennial problems. So like in Christianity, you know, it's the archetypal information in the narratives that are actually the healing part of them that give you the meaning and help you overcome or give you answers to the perennial problems. So you can't really build one up by yourself, because then you're just it's going to be a religion of self, and all your stupidity is going to be in that little narrative.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I mean,
it hasn't been means tested.
I suppose it's possible for someone who's particularly insightful to come across a pretty good pattern, in terms of, to come across a good pattern that could work. So it's not that it's impossible, but it's much less likely if you're not doing it in a community-oriented way.
Right, and the reason why the archetype holds is because it's universally true, and it becomes something that you can look to. Like Campbell talked about the hero archetype. So you can look at the stories and develop your own hero person, bonding with these stories, and it actually helps you create your life.
It's probably a useful process, as long as you don't put too much into it to the point where you're saying it's your religion. But it's probably a useful process to do. Yeah. I'll watch that. I put it in my queue, that Netflix show.
I'm a subject. I'm a subjective thing. I was born in 1981. I don't exactly remember that, but it's when they say I was born. And for the first 5 or 6 years of my life, I was taught about the world through stories. And I watched the people around me go about their daily lives, and I watched how they interact with each other. I saw the words they spoke, the emotions that they presented, and they were all stories and narratives built up. I didn't have many words in my own head, actually. It was just images, narratives of the actions and behaviors, ghostly images just passing through my mind. And so when I think about what this has in terms of relevance for developmental education in children, I'm not sure what purchase it can have for scalability, not just horizontally across the culture, but vertically in the domain of the depth of personhood when we begin. And when I look at the real perennial problems, they all stem from this inability to develop agape in personhood. And that is primarily found originating in the deep problems between parents and children and siblings. And all of that stuff is happening in a place that's almost completely inaccessible from propositional and other types of sophisticated analysis. So I'm still kind of there with all that he's shared so far. I know it's deeply meaningful to a lot of people that have lost their faith in the meaning that we're all gifted with as children when we come into this world, right? Because nobody really has a meaning crisis when they're 5. And I was abused, okay? So I didn't have a meaning crisis. I don't have one now, but the people that do, I don't think they had one when they were 5 either. And I think part of that is just the momentum of the neurochemistry. It's kind of a gift that we're given. It's a representation of the past, the momentum of narrative. And it's only when we start to question that narrative and when we think we find gaps in it that we start to develop the schism in our own selves and in our culture, and when we feel alienated. So that's the I'd love for him to speak on those kinds of things.
Yeah, and I think John's right. Like, we should give him some benefit of the doubt. Like, we usually do 2 episodes at a time. Tonight, I think we were all tired. We just we just did one. But I think he's continuing this aspect of the narrative in the next episode. So hopefully it'll come more clear. It's hard to believe that he's going to, even here where he says we may have a need for symbols and stories, that he's going to just jettison it completely. Like,
Right.
I
don't think he will.
badly.
Especially since, like, I was looking at your notes because I was trying to remember his exact phrasing, but he says that it may be that mythos is something indispensable to humans. That's not to say that it's metaphysically necessary. Like, this means it indicates some sort of ontological reality of some sort. But the fact that it is something that, like, we exist within a narrative. It's like how the almost
we
like
think
a
of ourselves
Kantian...
in a narrative. We think of ourselves as part of a narrative.
Right. And so I think when you find somebody saying something that disagrees with most of the other stuff that they've been presenting, it's usually that either they misspoke or they're attempting to alter the way that they're saying things in a slight way so that they can present it to someone in a particular way.
Right.
And that's why I brought up the rebel wisdom thing. I think that's what happened. I think he's trying to shape his language to make it palatable to certain groups so that they can engage with him in what his project is. That's what I think.
Which doesn't encourage me either. But I mean, I'm still a fan. I've been harsh on him in this episode, but I.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I think if you're
upfront
about adopting another person's language, it's perfectly acceptable to do that. And learning any foreign language, it's no different, let's say. But when you do it without explicitly pointing it out,
well, he may be doing it unconsciously too.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. Oh, that's another issue, by the way. Mirror neurons and how we develop narrative structure by watching other people. You can dispense with that. So
mythos is probably debatably indispensable because it's how your life is is your story. It's a story you tell yourself. If it isn't, it's chaotic.
Yeah. How do you even exist without any sort of narrative? Like, to be I is sort of like a continuity of moments together.
Well, yeah, exactly. You say to me, like, what are you about? And I talk about, okay, I met my wife when I was 25. We moved out to 29. We moved out to California. There's a whole narrative there that's me, basically.
How was your day? Is asking for a narrative. It's how are you? Is asking for a narrative.
Right. Otherwise, it's chaos.
No,
and
I don't
even
want
notice
a narrative
this
when I ask that question, Pod. Don't answer with a narrative.
That's right.
I'm glad you asked.
Just feed me some sort of experience.
Just tell me you're doing good, okay?
Yeah, I don't know how you can build up anything from this sort of post-narrative just experience or a higher state of consciousness.
Yeah, so I don't think he really...
Except as, like Nick was saying.
Or if he does, then he's going to have to...
We should all just sit silently and stare deeply into each other's eyes.
We should only speak in propositions.
I really hope
the next person to speak should go next.
I just think this was a bit of an off episode where I just think he wasn't quite as focused as he normally is, and he seemed a little off. He seemed like a little confused at one point where he didn't seem to be buying what he was saying in the way he has in the past. Like, he awkwardly sort of moved on to the 4 E's from the Agape thing. Like, he seemed to sense something's a little off with what I'm saying here. But that's okay. That's okay. He's not perfect, and he doesn't have to be. He's done an amazing job. So we're not trying to be not trying to be overly critical. Like I still like this has been, I think, a pretty influential series. Like I can't think of too many other comparisons that have changed my thinking and shaping my thinking than this series in recent years.
Yeah, I agree. It's slightly better than Jordan Peterson, I would say.
Yeah.
I
would say a lot better
version.
Yeah.
we got Campbell and Peterson and Vervaeke. Who's next? It's going to be like, we're going to get to a Buddha Christ figure soon, right? It's like just getting better.
Just the next iteration.
All right.
We'll keep on composites now. It's safe.
Yeah, I was gonna say Brett's gonna be the next guy.
Yeah, I'll do it. Okay.
It's probably gonna be somebody else from U.F.T. Really.
Yeah.
There's got to be some other really influential figure in that university that's gonna just rise up for all the young white males that are on angsty young white males.
I'm from Toronto, in their lives. Right outside Toronto, so I'm still in there. So
there are lots of people that will rise up to follow the Joker figure.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's one thing that I kind of want to get all of your guys' impressions on. That it seemed like what I kind of appreciated about being further in this series is he's more willing to kind of say more controversial things. Like just in the last 5 episodes, I think he says things that he wouldn't have said in the first 15 lectures, because now he's getting more comfortable and probably has a much greater audience that has been invested and maybe more willing to hear these more controversial things. The other controversial thing I thought was his complete disregard for essentialism at all, and saying there's no thingness to reality because it's combinatorially explosive. But the other thing that he said in this lecture that is his disregarding of objective value, which especially for religious people, this is kind of like a very hot topic, and like the reasons are because like in order for something to be rational, there has to be some sort of connection between what the subject is perceiving and what the object exists, how it exists ontologically. And so like if meaning itself is sort of this singular subjective process, it could be classified as a sort of delusion. And that's why I think most religious people are very apprehensive to saying that there is no such thing as objective value or objective relevancy or meaning to life in an objective sense.
Well, hold on. I mean, delusion.
So anyway, yeah.
Okay, go on. Sorry, I'll let you finish, and then I'll go on.
Well, yeah. I was just wanting to get kind of your guys' impressions of his sidestepping of the objective-subjective interconnectedness that he expressed that this is very important to a lot of people, and I wonder how effective do you think his solution to this problem is?
Well, did you want to go? Pleasure or doubt? Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I was immediately just reminded with the constant refrain of postmodernism ringing in the background of this, kind of area of the internet, and from all angles, right? It's not like the atheists are fighting as hard against the moving perception of a postmodern world as the religious are. Right, at least in the sense of Sam Harris and,
right.
And some
That's the interesting thing about Vervaeke is he's kind of in that I would say he is a postmodernist, at least his metaphysics for sure.
Yeah. And I actually greatly appreciate that. I think we do have to deal with postmodernism head on, even in a sense, move through it to get past it. I don't think we can kind of like sidestep
revert
it.
Back to modernism. Yeah.
However, I'm skeptical that what he's presented so far, at least, is enough to overcome it. So I don't know. I guess I'm floating still, waiting for judgment.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, just throw that question out there. What's new? What has he brought that's new other than
science? I've long thought though that, and I've said this before, and I had conversation about this before, that meaning and value is a property of a conscious, intelligent being. It's a proper. So when I value an object, it is not something there's no object that has intrinsic value. It is valuable to me as a conscious being, or valuable to you as a conscious being. If there's a God, valuable to God as a conscious being. But it is consciousness combined with intelligence, and I guess a certain amount of intelligence that creates meaning. So I agree that meaning is not inherent to an object, that what is meaningful is my relationship to the object, how I use the object, how the object may use me, or so on, so to speak, other people. So I get what he's saying when it's that relation, it's the relationship between me and the object and me that creates the meaning and the value, rather than a property of the object itself.
The one thing that, at least for me, whenever this idea comes up, it is almost similar to his objection to the religious notion of placing inherent meaning to objects themselves, is the fact that it kind of weakens your ability to self-correct. Because if value is a emergent, or if the value to a thing exists entirely within, say, the head or whatever, your embodied system of cognition, then how can you say, or do you have the framework in which to say that you were incorrect about what you were evaluating, or the evaluations that the thing had? So one way in which go ahead.
Well, I think you can't be incorrect that something is valuable to you or meaningful to you. You can say maybe it shouldn't think it's meaningful, but it's that mental qualia, sort of it's that emotional relationship that is the meaning. Meaning is a sense. You have a sense of meaning. Like it's okay. If I think it's meaningful, it is meaningful.
What is addiction?
Okay, so say that you have an interaction with some person and it appears as if they slighted you. And then that leads you to think, oh my gosh, they're being a dick right now. And then you come to realize, oh, what you perceived to be a slight was actually just, I don't know, they had some sort of quirky mannerism or something. And then that makes it like, that should be the thing that like corrects your subjective notions. Huh?
It don't matter. I end them either way. Either way, accidental slight or on purpose slight, I'd say take that the same way. That guy's in trouble from that point forward.
All right. Well,
but
don't worry, Greg. I won't slight you.
But your feelings are real at that time, yes, and then they change, right? So then you no longer have those feelings because you've rethought it. Your relationship to the concept or to the thing that was said changes based on the new information. That's what it's not intrinsic. Your offense to it and your lack of offense to it change based on your relationship to it.
What is addiction?
Addiction?
Mm-hmm.
Well, physical addiction is I guess a
rut that you find yourself caught within.
Mm-hmm.
An uncontrollable craving for something. Is that repeats over and over again? Is that a good description?
Yeah. How would you define addiction?
We addicted
Tyler?
to air.
Well, probably we tend to also have unhealthy when we say addiction too.
Yeah. Well, okay. So this seems important. This seems valuable, right? But it's nevertheless at least a kind of a weird admixture of an incredible desire and at the same time a realization that it's bad for you. Right.
Right. Sure. So if our values are based off of our desires for things, then there would be that conflict there between what we want and what we know is good for us.
Addiction is a surrender of agency. That's the key. Yeah. The addiction starts to control you, and you no longer control it. It's deeper than desire. You become attached to it, and you have to do it. Mm-hmm. So. Yeah. Can I say something about going back to the postmodern? Okay, because this is actually kind of interesting. You guys asked who the savior is, and actually probably John is the only guy who liked this. but I've been listening to N.T. Wright lately. He's probably too Christian for the rest of you, but John, you would like him.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean? Like Tyler and Nick are both Christians too, man.
Oh, are they really?
Yeah.
I quite enjoy N.T. Wright.
Yeah.
I haven't heard of N.T. Wright, but I listen to Christian. I listen to you.
I watch Unbelievable all the time.
Mm-hmm. Here's what he said about postmodernism. I thought this was totally on point. Postmodernism says that there are no truth claims, there are only power claims in disguise. And in that sense, that's one way a postmodernist is. And in that sense, Vervaeke is not a postmodernist at all, because he does think that there are truth claims, and he does think that there are. So, like, for example, on the lecture we're talking about, he said what you guys even brought this up earlier, the subjective attraction to objective attractiveness, which means there is a thingness that you aren't just creating relevance realization, to whatever. You're creating it to something that has some form of intrinsic realness to it. Maybe not the way like a dogmatist would think it. And maybe he's stripping it down and being more intuitive and subjective about it. But it's not totally divorced from, it's not just, hey, whatever, man. It's so.
I'd say that is probably quite right. That, like, even though he recognizes that there's something deeper beneath the propositional of whether it's like binarily true or false, there is still certain truth claims in regards to what things are like most relevant, I guess, that has some sort of truth.
It's even like when we're talking about the animal, okay? Even at just an animal level, there are things that are 100 times more relevant in realistic, real terms to an animal, and there are things that are totally irrelevant. And even on Twitter, there are 100 things that are 100 times more relevant with some sort of correspondence to reality, and some things that are totally, completely irrelevant. So it's not totally like he's nowhere close to as much of a subjectivist as a postmodernist.
I wouldn't see him relating everything to power in the way that postmodernists do.
I didn't mean to classify him as a postmodernist directly, but rather that he is in some ways accepting the postmodern frame and then trying to move beyond it.
Yes.
I think that would be a more accurate. He himself is not one, but he's not trying to ignore that kind of postmodern frame that's floating around.
He's not constantly warring with them like Peterson is.
Yeah, correct.
Well, I mean, I just listened to Peterson today, even sort of agree with the postmodernists in the sense of that, like Vervaeke said, we can always go deeper and we can always look at different angles of things. He just doesn't like their solution is to say, okay, well, there's no truth, and that's not
it's all relative all the time.
Right.
Yeah. That's the one thing that I found valuable from Peterson is that he accepts that like reality is combinatorially explosive and there is no thingness really to I don't know if he would say it in so many words, but his, I guess, solution to the postmodern problem is using pragmatism or Darwinism, really, to like it. Sure, it is the case that you can look at a watch in 1,000 different ways as like something to hit things with, something to tell time with, something to throw. There's so many ways in which you can interact with an object, but there's only very small specific numbers of ways in which you can interact with an object over a great period of time, over generations even. And that's like the, I guess, Darwinian solution to the postmodern
that's the relevance
problem.
Realization that there are certain parts of what we can zero in on an object that are more useful to us, more salient to us than others. Well, for example, like I think we've talked about this before. If I generally don't care how my iPhone works, but if it's broken, then how it works suddenly becomes really important, right? You know,
you just dropped some Heidegger on us. Which iPhone for Hammer?
Also, I do think it's important to note, and this ties into our earlier discussion with Vervaeke's quick comment on narrative, but it's important to remember that the postmodernists arose quite quickly after World War II and then during the Cold War. So we have to look at the context in which they were going, radical and creating a antithesis, and why they were doing it and what they were doing it against. And likewise, you also see the rise of propaganda, particularly with the Cold War, and
Don't you dare bring in narrative, Nick.
Yeah, but yeah, right, exactly. But I think a lot of that is useful for contextualizing postmodernism and this kind of extreme skepticism over narrative.
Necessary. Necessary, right?
Yes. Yeah. No, it was the necessary response to the time.
No. I mean, it's necessary that we look at the narrative.
Oh, yes.
To determine.
Well, and likewise, I think that the postmodernists were if you're trying to recover after World War II and you're trying to set up a world that jives with science and modernism and doesn't end up in World War II, you need this, right? Their solution was extreme radical skepticism around narrative.
Yeah.
That to me is it's so obvious, right? That's the most basic answer you could come to.
We should just acknowledge it was pretty rough to live in France around that time. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's why his saying is just saying we don't need to assume that the narrative is metaphysical truth. I mean, I think that sort of does it. We don't necessarily need to go to extreme skepticism, but we just have to say, hey, we're not going to attach ourselves too strongly to the historical truth aspect to it. We're more looking at the functional patterns that come out. But I wanted to ask, like take a sacred object for Christianity, like a cross. Is it really the cross itself that has intrinsic value, or is it that it symbolizes Jesus and the sacrifice and so on? Isn't that what is sacred and what is salient to you in the cross, not the actual object of the cross itself?
Man, I want to do a sermon. Can I do a sermon?
Go for it.
No, there's what's so fascinating about the cross and the way that it works actually is symbologically. Is that symbologically? I don't pick a word that's better than the way I pronounce it. You can't get more simple. Like it's just two lines crossing over each other, right? It's almost like if you wanted to avoid any further collapse, right? It's like the most simple, purest form of a symbol that you can come up with.
What's crazy is the symbol itself it's almost like an inversion of what the cross actually was. So in the Roman times, we take a criminal, we crucify them, and this is an indication to everybody else, hey, don't be like this guy, or we'll crucify you in this very shameful way. And then for Christians, that very idea is like the cross itself is almost like your saving grace. Like even through all the struggles of this world, because our Savior was resurrected, this cross is something that kind of provides us with the hope to get through our suffering. And
but isn't that the point? But my point in terms of this is, it's not the two sticks of wood that you find meaningful. It's what
it's the symbol. Yeah, it's a symbol.
Symbol is attached to the narrative, as
right. So it's not a property. It's not a property of the two sticks of wood. It's a property of the story.
Well,
here's the one potential. I totally agree with you, but it's not always true with religious people. And I'll give you an example where it's not. I have relatives in southern Italy. Now, I didn't go there as a Christian. I was an agnostic. But they took us in this tiny little town, Lopano. They took us to these caves where there's these relics of the saints, and they think that these relics of the saints have actual power and holy power, real intrinsic to them. I've never been there as a Christian. I don't know what I'd think if I went there. If I'd think, wow, this is just hokum and woo, or I'd be like, wow, I don't know. You know what I'm saying? So I hear what you're saying.
But even that power, why is that power valuable to you? Because it represents God, right? Even there, isn't it just
correct,
what the power represents?
But in some aspects of this isn't always true, but some aspects of Christian. It's hard to explain.
Yeah,
It's
like the way in which you frame the thing itself like changes your ability to find it salient, I think. Like if you were to say this isn't the body and the blood of Christ, but rather this is a symbolic representation of the body and the blood of Christ. There's a very large difference there between those two things.
Yeah, that gets back to our both people enjoying the magician on the stage, but half of them acknowledging he's an illusionist and the other half thinking he's a miracle worker.
Mm-hmm.
That was,
but it just shows think of how you react to symbols from another religion, which are probably not that meaningful to you. You know, so the same symbol has deep meaning for one person and not for the other. Which again is, I think, Vervaeke's point that it's not something inherent in the object; it's the relationship you have to it.
Well,
right,
so
but okay, but it's a little bit more complicated. Is my only point, because there are some times where it's really obvious, just a symbolic relationship, like a cross. But then there are other times where you're ascribing some sort of agency or talismanic power to the object itself, that it has actual. And the one I used in one of my videos was going to Auschwitz. I think, I don't know this for a fact because I haven't been there, but I use the example of my wife couldn't even set foot there. She's half Jewish, by the way. But that's not necessarily why, but she couldn't even set foot on the property because she'd be too, is there some sort of actual, not evil force there, but like so much,
history
so much,
there, connected to it.
It's sometimes it's real and not real at the same time. It's so subjectively powerful.
No, but it's not about it being real. It's about if you consider it valuable. Something can be real. Like maybe this object does have real power, but I don't care about it. It's not sacred to me, right? So I'm not going at, does the object have intrinsic properties, which is sort of what you're saying. It's how do we feel about those properties? Right, so you're saying maybe it is a real object with real powers.
But then it's also, what do you do with that feeling?
Is that inherently meaningful to me that the object has powers? Like maybe I don't care that the object has powers.
Right, but the next step is, what do you do with that feeling? What do you do with that belief? What do you do with that belief structure? Right. So, I mean, you can worship the idols. You can not worship the idols. Right. You can believe in a deity, you can not believe in a deity, but both of you can feel something. Just like Nick said, you can watch the magician and you can.
Mm-hmm. The way in which I kind of like think about, I don't know, there's a way in which you can kind of think about realness on a spectrum of its power to overcome you or your power to overcome it. And so like going back to addiction, for the alcoholic, a bottle of beer has this overcoming power to them, where if they're in close proximity to it, then they can't control themselves. And in the same way with many religious icons, that like Benny Hinn's jacket or something like that, where there's this group nature and as well as this religious iconography associated with the jacket itself, that leads people to become overcome by it in a very similar way.
But is that an inherent property of it?
Well, but
how can we know?
It's so close. The subjective becomes so powerful and real that it becomes indistinguishable. That's like my wife.
But hold on. Meaning is real. It's a real strong feeling and emotion. It's real. Like that's the whole point of this relevant realization and meaning. It's all real. The question is, where does it come from? Does it come from the object, or does it come from my relationship to the object? That's the only point. Not about the realness of it.
I think everyone's hitting on the fact that it comes from both. Again, right? Vervaeke's description as transjective is useful.
I would have no idea of where it comes from, really. Like this is something far outside of our ability to really measure or know, like where it comes from.
But
like
if it comes from the object, wouldn't everybody have a similar reaction to it?
No, not if they. Well, like there's a way in which you can
sensitive to that type of stuff.
That's true.
And some people are. The reason why my wife would would vomit before she ever set foot on Auschwitz because she'd be too sensitive to process it without extreme emotional distress. Another person,
Yeah.
you know, could just be like, okay, whatever, this was bad. But there's a spiritual relationship, and I'm using a very loose term.
And a Nazi may go there and celebrate it, right?
Right, but the evil that took place there has actual agency, and it actually did take place. And this it's so hard to say correctly, but like, you know, there's a realness to it because of what actually transpired there. And is my wife sensitive to actual agency, or is she just sensitive to the history and it's hard to differentiate.
Like, do you think if your wife, like, we don't want this to happen, if your wife suddenly had amnesia and you brought her to Auschwitz, do you think she would have the same reaction?
No, not at all.
But again, I think what you're doing is slightly conflating essentialism with basically as if it means that there's no such thing as a subjective, or a subjective becomes useless. Like, if there is, you know, essentialism of objects, that this somehow means that literally subjectivism is impossible. And I don't think that's the case.
No, I'm
that's
saying it is subjective.
Argued.
Wait, I'm saying it's subjective. That the meaning is subjective.
Yeah, but there's a way in which
you're framing it in the sense that right, the counter argument would be that there's essences to objects, and thus if there are essences to objects, then everyone should respond to the objects in the same manner. And I don't think that's
like the way at least like certain Christian Neoplatonists would say, like, no, the value or the meaning to an object is not inherent to the physical nature itself, but rather the fact that the physical object itself is like a reflection of the Platonic form of the crucifixion or something like that. And then it's not inherent to the subject, nor is it inherent to the object on its material basis or even its physical structure or anything like that. It's rather the ideals, the Platonic ideals in which our world corresponds with them in some way. And then we're just seeing we're seeing the shadows on the wall of the cave, but when we look at the shadow, we can see what the shadow is of when we look at things in real life.
For example, do you think these objects would have meaning if there were no conscious beings in the universe, including a god?
Meaning? No.
Right.
They might still have some essence. I don't know. Maybe not.
But like,
it's
we're
an
talking about
impossible
inherent value, right? So the value is a property of the conscious being, right? Not a property of the object.
Brett, this is where we can go down a rabbit hole of idealism, because like all things in which we interact with are based off of our subjective experiences of the objects themselves. And so like, oh, if I pick up this phone and it has this color and shape and things like that, and then I go blind, do I still see a phone here that has the color and shape? Like, does that mean the color and the shape and the pressure of the thing was subjective to me?
Look, let me ask you, do you agree that value is a property of consciousness combined with intelligence?
I have no idea. Like, I don't know how I would be able to know something like that.
Right,
like, I could assume it.
I think the answer is it's a complex, like extraordinarily complex relationship. Mm-hmm. So let's take the one I've used on my channel, Elvis Presley's guitar. Okay, that has actual real world material value by virtue of the fact that it was owned by Elvis Presley. But it's changed the value of the guitar just by the fact that, you know, like, you're an atheist. You know that nothing about that guitar is different, right?
Right.
So would
it's
you
my relationship
now let me ask you a really honest question as an atheist. Yeah. So if you're just a strict materialist, then you would never pay more. And I'm not saying you're calculating because it's worth something and you're going to sell it, but you would never pay more for a guitar owned by Elvis Presley, right? Because
well, first of all, let's not talk about strict material. I don't like. I'm not a strict materialist anyway. But I would say no. I mean, we talked about
if
narrative.
one is one.
Well,
Because the
no,
strict
because-
material, is no different than because Elvis Presley died. So that guitar is the same
That's
material.
a little bit more complex, but there's a story behind it, right? If you care about Elvis,
But a true story associated with the guitar. That's the thing.
Right,
like if
right.
we're saying that a value is entirely objective, then any story that we create is just as good as any other, as long as we believe it.
People get conned into buying guitars from that someone says is Elvis's guitar and it wasn't, but they still value it. Right?
And if value is entirely subjectively based, then they were correct in their like buying of that guitar.
Right.
It's not about being correct or incorrect. You have the feeling of value that may change based on your getting new information. It's a real feeling.
Yeah,
it's real. It's very real.
I'm asking a different question. I'm asking a concrete question. It doesn't really have necessarily have a right wrong answer. Deacon Murderman, for example, would not buy Elvis Presley's guitar because the material of the guitar itself is no different than the guitar owned by Joe Schmo who can't play two things. So he wouldn't ascribe anything more powerful or talismanic to the guitar than the strict material properties of the guitar itself. Most people, even most atheists and materialists, will go, cool, Elvis Presley's guitar. And they'd have some relationship to the fact that it was owned by him and how cool is this. Some of that is a spiritual thing. That's all I'm saying.
Sure. No, sure. I mean, I agree with that. But but the whole point of this is it's not the intrinsic nature of the guitar. It's the relationship that Elvis touched it and used it. Right. And I know he touched it and used it.
Yeah. So that's exactly like what Vervaeke was kind of trying to get away with. What the objective valuist wants to do is make sure that their subjective feeling of value is connected to the objective like reality to what that object was. Like we don't want to be suckered into buying some Elvis Schmesley's guitar. We want to actually
Springfield's guitar.
But even taking Elvis's guitar, all five of us here would have a different feeling of value towards that.
Exactly. Right? Mm-hmm. True.
Yeah. You asked a question earlier. Where is value located? You said, would you say it's located in the brain and intelligence?
I'd say the system that is me, the system, the conscious being, the conscious system.
So it's a funny thing with narrative, and it's a funny thing with like the boundaries that we draw. So let me ask a couple of questions. Would you say that intelligence and value is not just the product of your brain, but also the product of the earth?
Well, I'm not sure if I understand what you're saying, but I mean, for example, when we value something, usually we have a reason for it.
Would you say that intelligence exists on the earth?
Oh, sure.
It sprang from it.
I mean, I'm not sure how to answer that, but I guess
since you're a human being that is a byproduct of the earth and
Sure.
Did the earth spring from the sun?
Or a sun, yeah. I mean,
so narratively speaking, did intelligence come from the sun?
In a roundabout way.
And it also, having spawned it, a star, not our star, let's say, because if I believe Neil deGrasse Tyson and all the star stuff, and before him, Carl Sagan.
But you're talking about the causal chain there, right? But
that's a causal chain. That's right. The narrative.
Right, but that's not where it nests. It nests in this system, but this system came about because of a causal chain, including.
Wait. What do you mean by nests?
Meaning that it's a property of the information processing of my brain.
It is also physically located as a property within the solar system, is it not?
Sure, but I mean, you could look, but that doesn't help us because so is the object that you're looking at. We're looking at the object between. We're trying to look at the level of abstraction of this system and the object and the relationship between them, right?
So yeah, we are. Why?
Because that's what's salient at this time.
Why?
I never know what to answer these questions. I don't know what you're getting at. I don't know. Tell me why you think, and then I'll see if I understand what you're asking.
Well,
No, he got you. Just be gotcha. Be gotcha.
I'm talking about.
Well, I don't know if
sacred-
he's got me. I genuinely don't understand. I'm not saying he has it or hasn't. I'm not
trying
following
to
it yet.
get you, by the way. I'm never
No, no.
trying to get you, Pod.
No, I understand. I just don't know I don't know what the answer is to the question.
I know. That's why I always ask questions in the weird way that I do, because I don't want people to know the answer to them.
But I don't know the relevance of the answer either. I guess
Well,
is what
that's
I'm
the
trying to
great
get at, yeah.
seeking and searching that I'm always trying to do myself. Is
Sure.
what the hell's the relevance to all this? Okay, so
Well, you can't throw out random questions and hope they're relevant. I expect
yes,
you
I
have an
can,
idea
and I
of why they're
will.
relevant.
I will
Yeah.
continue.
One of them's bound to be relevant at some point.
Right. Like a lotto, right? Eventually, Tyler's going to be worth $1 million.
And it's
So-
wow, it all makes
Monkeys
sense.
writing
Yeah.
Shakespeare.
Okay, so what's the relevance? So maybe not what's your answer, but what's the relevance of the question? Maybe I can better understand what you're asking.
So when we're developing sacredness and when we're developing that thing, which we should hold in highest esteem and cherish and love, like, point our agape towards. This is related to the discussion that we had before about free will and determinism. Where do you choose your analysis point? Where do you stop it, right? Where do you fix your object of appreciation, let's say, in the causal chain of where your intelligence came from? And when you fix it in the machinery here, you're fixing it in a kind of localized, egoistic, subjective experience, right?
I'm also fixing it in the present.
In the present, correct, yeah.
Yeah.
But you could also just as easily say, take a religious mindset and fix it in the great causal chain that extends all the way back to a prime mover, right?
But that still doesn't change. Like, the
Which
reason we
one
care about
seems
it-
more momentous?
But it's still my relationship. Why do I care? We're talking about meaning and
So,
value.
okay,
It's
here's-
why do I care about the prime mover? That's
Ah,
a
okay,
relationship
so-
between me and the prime mover.
Okay, well,
Just
not
feel them in your
intrinsic to
heart.
the price.
Just
Yeah,
feel them
yeah.
in your heart, please.
right.
No,
right.
but that's what I mean. But that's a relationship between me and the object of my consideration. It's
And
not
the process and all of it. Try to hold it all at once. So, like, your present moment pod is a product of 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago,
sure.
and
A
a
million years
generation
ago,
ago,
billion years ago.
daddy, right? And his daddy and
Okay,
daddy.
just stop saying daddy.
Father.
Father before you,
That's right.
his father. All the way back, man. All the way back until they were nothing but star stuff.
Sure. I
What
agree.
narrative do you want to use? Okay, so if you can catch hold of that momentum pushing through the great reality, that seems like a much more awe-inspiring, depth diving mystery.
Sure, but isn't that a different question? And I'm not trying to be pedantic here, but that's not like I can agree with you. We can have different narratives that have different sets of meaning, but that's sort of my point. How much meaning we put in depends on the narrative that we're looking at. It's not about the object itself. It's about my relationship to the object.
hold
and how
on,
I
wait,
think
wait.
about it in my history.
My narrative is encompassing all of the objects, right?
Wow, very impressive.
I know.
Well,
But
one
you're-
thing I want
go
to try to run with you is rather than thinking of this as a problem of ontology and like what are the metaphysical foundations for value and things like that, maybe think of it just for this example as a indispensable limiting factor to human relevancy or human cognition or psychology. That's the term I'm wanting, where we have this innate need of having our subjective experiences correspond with what we believe to be objectively true. So take Elvis's guitar example. I just spent $12,000 on Elvis's guitar, and I enjoy it. I hang it up. I love it. This is something. It's the belle of my house that I always show off to all my guests. And then at some point I have a friend that's an appraiser or something, and then he discovers, pretty sure this isn't actually Elvis's guitar. You see this signature? It's not quite right.
Shut up. Who else?
No, all this time I associated all this value. I put money into it. I told all these people that this was Elvis's guitar, and now all of that's gone. Why is it gone? What changed?
My relationship to it.
It's why, like
that is exactly how a fly feels when it lands in a Venus flytrap.
Oh shit! Yeah.
You were supposed to be this one thing. You were very attractive to me. Oh shit! Right? Yeah. I'm being digested. Yeah, that's that. Okay, so this is the great problem with the desire and the subjective. Yeah, I'm sorry if I'm.
And like
wait, but then a millennial comes and says, "Why do you care about Elvis anyway?"
Yeah, exactly.
Except
boomer,
they tweet that to you instead of talking to you.
But that's the thing. Like now that I find out that this isn't actually Elvis's guitar, I can't keep on hanging it up. I have to get rid of it.
You no longer value it. But it didn't change.
Something has changed.
You changed.
Something has totally changed in the spiritual reality of the guitar itself. Because you found out that it wasn't Elvis's guitar, but you can no longer look at it the same way. Something has fundamentally changed.
But the change is in you, not the guitar. No.
Right? The reason I valued it was because I thought that this was Elvis's guitar. I was wrong.
The narrative about it. It was right.
So I need a narrative in which the objective reality, the story for what this thing was, is connected to how much I'm evaluating it.
But the narrative doesn't reside in the object itself. It resides in you too, right?
Yeah, but I can't just create this new narrative. The narrative is true. I need it to be true in order to value it.
It is true, John. It's true. It's okay.
But it's your relationship. But don't you see, like, doesn't this demonstrate that it's your relationship to the narrative and to the facts about the guitar rather than the intrinsic properties of the guitar itself?
Remember what I was saying about how I differentiate what is real based upon how much power it has to overcome, or I have to overcome it? The thing is this meaning-making system that I am, that creates me, has this overcoming component to it in which it only can have value associated with it.
Vervaeke's talking about.
No.
Like Vervaeke here.
No, Vervaeke is saying that we can get rid of. We don't have to have this association between our subjective value and what is objectively valuable.
No. Wait. No, he's saying the feeling of meaning is a relationship between you and the object, not a property of the object itself. That's what he's saying. That's what the meaning is. It's the relationship between you and the object.
Sure, he can say that ontologic. He can say that is the ontological basis for how value comes about, how we have value. But from a phenomenological perspective, that doesn't work for me. I can't just say, oh, I already liked this guitar. I mean, it's a good guitar. It looks great. Like, it works perfectly for my room. Like, it has this aesthetic value to it, but I can't just pretend like it's valuable. Like, I have to have some sort of narrative.
I'm not saying that value is chosen necessarily. Value can be involuntary. Like, you can't help valuing things.
But
that doesn't mean it's a property of the object. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Craig.
What John is saying is that something fundamental and essential about the guitar has changed. Period. He can't look at it the same way because it's not Elvis Presley's guitar.
But I'm suggesting it's not something fundamental about the guitar that changed, but something fundamental about you that's changed.
It doesn't even matter. Like,
it seems like neither of those are true.
Well, maybe not fundamental, but something in you has changed. Your relationship to the guitar has changed.
Well, it wasn't really your relationship to the guitar. It was your relationship to Elvis Presley.
Another way to describe it is that it's the guitar's relationship to the rest of the human beings on the planet that's changed.
Sure, but that's what Vervaeke's saying too. It's the relationship that's the meaning generator.
You can say that all you want, but in order to actually generate meaning, there has to be some sort of objective basis. Yes, it's subjectively based because everything we experience is subjectively based, but it has to have some sort of like to us. In order for something to have subjective value, it has to have some sort of objective connection.
You're responding to an objective fact, or what you at least perceive as an objective fact.
Yes,
right?
in order to have this feeling of value, it has
between the objective fact and the value of that fact.
Well, okay, so if Vervaeke is trying to create a meaning-making system, he's disregarding this limiting factor of human psychology in which meaning-making is based within the objects themselves. That there has to be some sort of the reason I value this guitar is because I believe this was Elvis Presley's guitar.
I hear you, yeah, but you just said because I believe.
Yes, I know, and that I'm fully you can. I can fully accept Vervaeke's ontological system of metaphysics for value. That's fine. I don't care, but that system, that metaphysical system of the ontological basis of value, doesn't work on a subjective basis. I have to believe that this was Elvis Presley's guitar. I can't just take some other guitar. Okay. Yeah.
I believe
that
this object is movable by me.
Very astute
fundamental property. It's a fundamental property of the object that I have developed through a historical narrative where I have realized I have the strength to move it.
And is that valuable to you or not? Is it meaning is that valuable to you?
Well, it's a fundamental property to all things, actually, mass.
But is it valuable to you?
Yes, the ability to move it, incredibly. In fact, all motion is valuable to the universe. You have to have motion. It's a fundamental value.
But the value is an active thing on your part. You are actively appreciating it.
No, Tyler's pointing out that he has a belief regarding the object, and the belief corresponds with reality.
Sure.
And it corresponds with a fundamental value that you can't, in fact, escape in any system, motion and mass.
Okay, that's it. You're using a different version of value. I think you're using value.
No, I think they're actually the same. A layer deeper, they just have a different. They have the same root, but a different inflection, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, we develop these senses of value.
Value is our subjective. It's our model of like 1 pound exists only because we've defined an arbitrary unit as a pound.
Yes, but mass is a fundamental value or
you
property.
Came into this world,
the value
an essential
is our
property of matter, right?
But we have determined the value as we could have called it a blue, right? We
did in fact where I was going.
That
your baby.
Value is based on a essential fact, property about what matter is.
Yes, but we gotta separate, and we should move on a bit. But we gotta separate, I think, because I don't want to beat a dead horse. But we want to separate the objective property and my valuing of that objective property. Those are two separate
Everyone
things.
knows.
Yeah, that's don't confuse the sign with the signifier or the signified. The signifier with the signified.
So yes, when we value things, I value food because it gives me nourishment, and it tastes good. Those are objective facts about the food. So I don't think Vervaeke is saying objects don't have objective properties.
But
our value of those properties change depending on our relationship to them. I value the apple much more when I'm hungry than when I'm not hungry. The apple is the same, but my relationship to it changes depending on my state of hunger. If I'm starving, it's the most important thing in the world.
Mm-hmm.
If it's on a plate with
that's basically true. And the Elvis Presley guitar the value changes depending on how much you care about music, how much you actually care about Elvis.
Yes.
Yes, all of that is true. All of that is true. But there is a objective relationship to reality. Elvis was a great musical performer who played the guitar. So there is some sort of relationship that is rooted in facts.
Right. And I think that's the point I was trying to make is in order for us to have this feeling of value in relation to our world in which we experience, it's based within what we believe to be true.
Yes.
And important.
Yeah.
Because
I don't know about that.
Well, because you're not going to care if it's Elvis Presley's guitar if you don't care about music or Elvis Presley.
Well,
and you don't
okay.
like them.
Yeah, you guys are all right about that, but think about the way that develops
money.
ultimately. It's a kind of mimetic transfer to other people, right? Everyone's like, ooh, Elvis Presley, and you get a kind of combined urgency and sense of value from all the people around you, and it expresses itself as an opportunity for you to purchase and hold this token, this item that everyone else appreciates, and your reputation game and all that stuff is involved.
Right.
Yeah, the kid wants the toys because all the other kids want the toys too.
Right. And I want,
Right.
if you just keep
And
winding
they
it back though, you can see that the origins of our own sense of motion and the first values that we learn, which is the ability to move our body and our eyes to look at the world, all of that's our very first value. This is this random kind of bouncing around that you can send signals down those things. That's as much as I can send the signals down there and it's doing crazy stuff. Oh, that's a table. I'm keep bumping into it. And eventually you build up this weird sense of the world that you start to refine more and more of your capacity to shape it and you.
It slowly becomes relevant to you. Right.
Well, sort of. Like if you watch children, you'll see they just do random crazy things all the time, right? And then that the parents and all the people around them kind of shape the boundaries of proper behavior and help them, program them, so to speak, understand what is relevant based on the past information they received from their narrative.
Do you understand the critique I'm making of Vervaeke? Is that he's trying to disentangle our objective connection, or like the subjective impressions of value, to there being some sort of object that has inherent value within it. But I don't see how he can do that, because that's just not how we have the reasons that we have value for things is because we believe there's some inherent property of the
it's rooted in some form of concrete facts.
Right.
But except I still have to get back to it.
Of what we believe to be true.
And that's the relationship we're
Yes.
talking about. Like that's the relationship. So like that is the relationship.
But again, to that point, you can't avoid that. That's the solipsistic critique, right? That I can prove nothing exists other than.
But hold on, you can believe
mind.
X is true, but you don't necessarily value it. So belief is based on your value is not.
Wait, hold on. Let me ask you a question.
Well, hold on. Craig was going to say something.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, okay. What the problem with this conversation is that we're all the phenomenon we're trying to describe is extraordinarily complex. Because the value-making machinery, somebody talked about different aspects of society. There's different layers of how you're going to value the Elvis Presley guitar. So we're trying to sift down something really extraordinarily complicated. But all John is trying to say is that there is some fact base to it. And then what you're saying is correct, Pleasure Dow, that there's value-making going into it. But then there's society is always in negotiation as to what's ultimately important, and that's constantly changing and shifting.
Well,
right.
I want to press on the objective side of things, not just the subjective, because take gold for instance. Okay, historically, a very valuable thing, right? But it's
valuable. Is it objectively valuable? Gold?
Well, there's some objective value to it. And he's going somewhere cool with this because it's
yeah. So Craig, they're great. Craig's a smart guy. So gold can be used in a lot of different ways, right, Craig? You can send it on a phonograph flying on a satellite through space that carries a particular recording of music. You can use it in electronics. That's what we.
Why is that objectively valuable though? What?
It's objectively value inherent in the gold in a system that was never even created yet, and yet we had value for the gold. But the shaping of that value.
It's an objective property, but is it an objective value?
Well, the actual value of gold is always changing in relationship to supply and demand, and the market value of gold is constantly shifting. But there's some intrinsic value to gold underneath it all. I think that's what he was.
Also,
Yeah,
like
yes,
the
that's-
utility, like say I value things in which can be used for which can have many different uses, and gold happens to satisfy that criteria. That would mean gold is like objectively matches that criteria.
Gold objectively had electronic value long before we recognized that value, and we valued it just because.
What I would say is it has
objective.
objective electronic properties that we value because of their use to us.
Sure. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I mean everything is of use to us, so to speak.
Right. It's the relationship to it. Right. That's what's that's what I think Vervaeke's talking about. It's the relation. That use is the relationship.
Right.
That's what creates the value.
Again,
use.
we could not have found that value in leaves, right? I cannot find the value for using electronic, metal stuff in a leaf.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Okay, so that's a quality within the object that the value cannot be expressed in. So there's something inherent there.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We want to match our subjective impressions of value and of utility to how the object is as it actually is.
Yes, but that's not contradicting Vervaeke, I don't think. That's consistent, exactly consistent with what he said.
The only thing I was critiquing Vervaeke on is that he's. I think I said it already. I don't know if I want to go into it.
I don't want to go.
We don't like how he used Agape. That's the only thing we were complaining about. That's the only part that we didn't like. They were always using Agape. Other than that, yeah, it's consistent.
Shut him down. Proper word use. This is done. We're done.
Yeah.
I got a jet. This was actually really cool.
Yeah. Thanks for coming by.
Yeah, this was fun. So I might actually start addressing the Elvis Presley guitar. I had it in one of my videos, and you might see Elvis Presley guitar in the next couple of days. I might bring it up again. All right, but
although maybe you got to pick a more recent example for them to like. Elvis? Who's
what
that?
you want the Justin Bieber guitar?
Exactly.
It's the company Supreme. That's a fun thought experiment.
Okay, Boomer.
All right, guys.
All right, have a great
night. Good night, Craig. Thanks for joining us.
Guys. Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Thank you.
Good times. Bye-bye.
Also, dandelion leaves have manganese, iron, zinc, and a few other noble metals.
I did not know that.
But you get what I'm trying to say? The difference between the objective properties and our valuing of those subjective properties.
There is a way in which I can think of how the value to a thing can be inherent to the thing itself. I don't know if it can work on a material basis, but I think it can work on an organic basis. So let's take symmetry, facial symmetry. That is something which humans find attractive for the opposite sex. Now, when you have like a broad scope of people, and only a few of them have facially symmetrical features, those are the ones that will be bred with. And then those, their young will have similar features to their parents, to the point where the very value of aesthetic beauty is inherent to their children in a sort of way.
I'm not. First of all, beauty is very subjective. I mean, the same person can be seen as beautiful to one person and not to another, right?
Would you say that
John
facial?
was talking on a feedback loop.
Would you say that facial symmetry is an inherent
I
thing
think we've evolved to have certain preferences.
I'm just asking if facial symmetry is heritable.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, nope.
But beauty is.
Well, different. I don't know if it
is not heritable. I want to.
Dang it. Okay. Well, let's say blue eyes. Okay, blue eyes is heritable. How about that?
Yes.
Sure, okay.
Sure.
And let's say that blue eyes are something that are found to be aesthetically significant to human populations. So if there is this association of aesthetic beauty to the having of blue eyes, when you have children that have this component to them and they're interacting within a system which view this component as being beautiful, this is, I don't know, the only way I can really think refer to it as an inherited aesthetic quality to them.
Okay, well, hold on.
Like the very reason that they have blue eyes in the first place is because their parents had blue eyes, and otherwise they would not have the blue eyes.
But I think you're using
it's a direct response from the evaluation of blue eyes as being aesthetic.
Mm-hmm. This is why sexual selection is such a
we can use a different example, like
again, the point is that there's a feedback loop, because the relationship of the person is the thing that created something objective in reality, and then it's being evaluated by the people that made the thing in reality. Is that what you're commenting on?
Yes.
Yeah.
But the value,
So
okay, what is it about blue eyes? What is it about the blue eyes intrinsically that makes them beautiful?
I think it indicates healthiness to them.
There you go. Indicates healthiness.
Mm-hmm.
That's the relationship.
Okay, so the healthiness is an objective quality to a person.
But by valuing that, when I see the blue eyes, it makes me think that's a healthy person.
My point.
If I see somebody who's misshapen, I think they're unhealthy, and that I have a negative value to. That's what creates that it's the relationship.
The point I'm making is that you can't disentangle the value to the product,
the property,
because it's because maybe we'll switch
wait, hold on. But that's when we say a relationship, there is a two-way. It's a relationship. It's not just. It's that. But that's both parties.
What I'm saying. What I'm saying is the actual value, the aesthetic quality of having blue eyes is inherent to the person themselves, because the only reason that they have those blue eyes are because their parents made it and caused them to exist.
Yeah, but that's not what we really mean by value there, right? It's just they have it, right? They value their eyes because it allows them to see. They may like the color of them, but it's not valuable because it was inherited. It's valuable
because it was created through the recognition of value initially.
Like they wouldn't exist otherwise.
I don't know. First of all, ugly people breed all the time. It is not just that's incel mythology. Sure. Most people breed. The vast majority of people
specific breed. Person.
And I bred 3 times.
Oh my god.
I know there's incel mythology that it's only the Chads and the
no,
it's not actually true.
Definitely not. But there is something here, and I think there's another aspect to this, which is that while evolution often has the relational aspect that you're talking about, the health, we also often or always lose the ability to pick up signal from noise.
That's the whole problem with the moose. They grow their antlers too large to the point that they can't even pick up their heads.
Same with
due to sexual selection.
Goats or sheep, their horns will kill them just because it's a signal of health. Birds of paradise,
peacocks,
their tails grow too long, etc., etc.
Well, that's the thing. That's the interesting thing about peacocks is it's supposedly a fitness indicator that, like, even though I have all of these ornate, I'm fast enough that I can outrun all the predators that will obviously be able to see me.
Gazelle stunting on the prairie, they'll do these ridiculous jumps while dodging predators, and scientists could not figure out why they were possibly doing it because it made them so much easier to kill. and it was because they're just like showing off for the ladies and stuff.
Wait, hold on. Can I just ask? Are you thinking that because he's saying it's a relational, that he's saying it's arbitrary value? I don't think he's
the point. So the point I was first making against Vervaeke is that he was saying that we can provide a system of value that it does not have to be based with any sort of objective aspect to the thing itself.
Metaphysical, yeah. Right.
Sure.
Objective attractiveness, yeah.
This is the prior point that I was making with Elvis's guitar. Where I disagree with him on a phenomenological level. Like, I don't think we can see things as being valuable if from our experience we're just imposing some sort of value onto the thing. I don't think that works. At least,
let me ask you.
Mm-hmm.
Did you accept that the only reason we can have value is because both the guitar exists and I exist, and the story about the guitar, my thoughts about this guitar exist? Like, you need all of that to have the value of the guitar.
Yeah, that sounds like, yeah.
So that's, I think, what he means. That's a transjective. You know, it's you need both. You can't have, if there's just one, if there's just me or just the guitar, you don't have the value for the guitar.
Yeah, but the story
both of them in a relationship.
We have to believe that the story corresponds with the actual guitar.
Sure, but what I'm saying is not.
Which is exactly the thing.
He's saying that
that's exactly the thing that Vervaeke said we could disregard, is the objective connection between our value and the guitar itself.
Also, part of a transjective relationship, this might be another way to communicate it. Part of having a transjective relationship is a assumption of an objective and a subjective, right? Even if they are useful fictions, they must exist in order for the transjective relationship to exist. That might be another way to get through the argument. So, right, if he's placing value in the transjective as John pointed out, as an ontological reality, part of the transjective existing is also positing the subjective and the objective as actual realities. Right? It's
sure.
You might say it's contained within it. In that sense, saying that the transjective is real is also admitting that there is an objective value. It's just that it is framed within a transjective context.
I thought it means like there's the subjective and the object, and
I see. Okay, so Nick's point is that Vervaeke is trying to kind of pull value away from the location within the object itself, but he's instead placing it in the transjective space, which is because of both the object and the subject. Like, you can't have the transjective space without both the object and the subject. So it's not like he's taking it out of the object, really. He's just taking it to a place where it's both the object and the subject working together, or it's because of both the object.
He says it's the transjectivity of the relationship that we need rather than objective attractiveness. That's how he words it. The transjectivity of the relationship. It's the relationship between the two rather than the objective.
The relationship between the two would not work if you only had one of those things.
Right.
That's why you still need the objective.
I'm going to go out on a limb here.
But the value doesn't exist without... Sorry, go ahead.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that we are beating a dead horse.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we've got to go back later, just look at the other ways you've described it and really dive into it. But, I
went to the bathroom and I came back.
We ended up like going backwards a little bit.
Yeah. Yep. But this is good. I mean, and sometimes we need a break from it and then come back to it and let it sit for a bit.
But what if it changes while we're not looking at it and it loses value in the meantime?
It changes.
Oh, don't kick it off again.
All right. Do we want to go on or do we want to end it there?
I think I've talked about all.
Did we have any more to talk about on this?
There was the 4 principles of cognitive science with embodiment, emergence, excellence, and.
He actually thinks there's 5E.
Wait. I don't know if I have the 4th one actually. embodiment, emergence, excellence. Yeah, I don't I don't.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, but I'm not sure there's a lot
Yeah.
to talk about there. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah,
It's
no
funny,
real
right? The part that dives into cognitive science is so lacking in narrative, we lose relevance quite quickly.
Well, he explained it well, but it was just not something I could directly map to any of these types of topics that we're interested in.
Yeah. I did notice again a lot of right Buddhists somehow new modern cognitive science thing, but we've already kind of hit on that.
One thing maybe to talk about, or maybe it's for next time, the transcendence as the transcendence into the depths of the psyche rather than transcendence into the transcendence above. I didn't quite understand what he was getting at. Like, I know he was trying to say transcendence not in the spiritual sense. I got that, but I didn't quite understand what he really meant.
I wonder if it's like, instead of like seeing yourself from an above perception, like you're actually stepping out, like you kind of have the not NDEs, but when you have like an astral projector or something like that, where you're stepping out of your own body, but rather those types of higher states of consciousness aren't stepping outside of your own body, but rather submerging yourself into the unconscious or the subconscious that you normally aren't actually residing within. But I don't know.
Does transcendence
exactly
have a real solid definition? I mean, it's almost something I sort of feel, but I don't know.
Yeah, so
it's hard to get a sense of
across, and then whatever sentence is beyond something.
So the narrative is important here. The historical narrative of the argumentation in this space is what matters. So the specific use of transcendence in the early religious philosophizing, let's call it, that's what he's talking about. He's trying to oppose and this is where emergence and immanence is another word that gets used in this place. This is all in that sphere of argumentation and religion and philosophy of science and all that. It's like, where do those emergent properties come from, right? Is it something that is provided by this kind of heavenly top-down approach, or is it something that emanates from the kind of stochastic, chaotic, random processes of things bumping into each other? And that is always the tension, right? It's like, and Pageau talks about this, right? It's the tension between the heaven and the earth. So when you're talking about that, he's directly referencing avoiding the tendency of moving to heaven and explaining it by giving that to God, and moving instead inwards and giving it to the structures underneath that produce whatever we are from within.
I've always thought of it in terms of like transcending, like it's a relation to something bigger than yourself, like even society. Like it goes beyond me. It goes to my relationship with the world around me. That's sort of a transcendent type of
well, and beyond you can also be beyond in the micro sense, right? My eyes can't see molecules are beyond me. Yeah. I don't know if that made sense, but maybe that's one analogy for what he means by a kind of downwards transcendence. Even with emergence, there is still a bizarre orientation towards kind of looking up. While we look for the explanation below us, it still has this like upward trajectory, right? It's building itself.
It's moving it up to the conscious human layer. Is what it is. Yeah. The emergences are those phenomena in which the consciousness experiences, and so that is activity and organization and order that moves up from the bottom and then presents itself at the qualia level for humans.
Well, and I guess one of my questions would be then, I don't know if this even relates to Vervaeke. It's more of stuff I've played with before, but what's the legitimate upside down hierarchy? What's it pointed towards? What's the God below us instead of the God above? And if you look into some of the Eastern religions, they deal a lot more with this. That's in Hinduism, right? center of being, the source of the fundamental life energy is, 2 inches below your navel, basically between it's what supplies the energy to your sexual organs.
The libido.
Yeah. And that's also in Chinese Taoism, right? The Dan Tian is in the exact same location. So everyone has a sense, you get this surge of energy from 2 inches below your navel, and then people contextualize it in different ways.
Oh, so within those religions, they actually hold the libido as kind of your energy source, I guess?
The fundamental life energy of all existence. Yeah. And then it's represented in us in that particular form. Yeah.
It's interesting how and where it shows up. Like even the Jewish Kabbalah tradition has the various they're almost like chakras, right? The way they have the Ein Sof set up. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. The heaven and the earth and the soul and how it gets put in. There's a lot of overlap with the Eastern stuff, which is really interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that of all, like, if we were to enter into a subjective science, I think something like the chakra system is dead accurate, because it's based on what is almost the most objective form of a subjective or a subjective fact.
It's a localizing.
Right? When we feel love, it happens specifically in that location of the body for everybody, right? When you have a sexual urge, it comes from the same place, right? Everyone will point to the same place. The will, right? Why we describe social anxiety as butterflies in our stomach, right? That's very deeply connected to literal physical sensations that we receive that inform us about our relationship with the world, onwards and onwards, right? It's a pretty clear map. And then we draw up all the different types of relationships and what it's supposed to mean, the metaphysics underlying it, and that's what ends up, getting embedded in the religions. But I forgot where I was going with this. Sorry, it was random.
That was interesting.
It was just a reverse hierarchy. That's all.
Oh yeah. I was just gonna say, like, I don't know what springs to mind on the concept of a reverse hierarchy. It just seems to be like whoever's being most oppressed within a society, they're the one to kind of hold up as like who we ought to do things for, in some sense. I don't know if that's what you meant
like
by
a reversal of the up. That's a fountain feed. I guess what I'm looking for, right? When you think of the pyramid, everything concentrates towards the point of where there's the full merging of everything into the Godhead. So what's the upside down triangle? What's it concentrating towards? And there is actually interesting answers, right? Because if you think of the kind of classical Gnostic form of God, it is that which is transcendent up, right? Abstraction, like moving into the Platonic realm. The Platonic realm is what's real, and creation just poorly mimics it. But so if we kind of map it onto a body, right? That's like moving up through the brain and out the top of the head. Then the other main drive, I guess, would be desire, right? And the Rig Veda starts with, in the beginning was desire. Like there was nothingness. It describes cold waters, and then like existence happens when there's an urge or a surge of desire. There's some similarity to that in the Christian mythos, just in the impulse of God's will to create.
He wanted there to be something rather than nothing.
And then you have the middle point between those two. So if desire is kind of this God below, and right, this Platonic abstraction and pure archetypal symbol is kind of the God above, then in the center of those two you have love, right, which then gets characterized when
we lost him.
No. Characterized by what? We need to know.
So that I see the hierarchies always as the great web of ancestors that extend out behind me, right? That led to the funnel of my subjective experience. And then
think I'm back.
Whatever.
There you go.
No, you're not back yet.
You're gonna say love was characterized by something.
Oh, just if you then combine the two hierarchies, right? The Platonic God with this primitive God of desire, the center, the meeting point, the synthesis of the two hierarchies is, the center is love, the heart. So in between the genitals and the brain is the heart, and that's the
like that. I don't know if you know the image of Saint Augustine, where like there's the sun coming to him, and like there's the heart that I think he's holding up, and like in between his head. I'd have to look at it exactly. Something like that.
Yeah. So if you can see the inversion of the family tree as below you, right, and the future of your family tree is above you. And love is the thing that allows that thing to keep moving forwards, and
also the eye of the needle.
That exactly, yes. Yeah. And that require you need love at that point to produce the new offspring, right?
And that's love in the agapic sense too.
Yeah. And we have various, like, I'm not pushing on like a romantic sense at all, but right, you need love in order to make the best game moving forward, right? Because you can have sex produce offspring, but there's a very different game of life being played by anglerfish than the one that humans play, right? And that's purely
the lobsters. Never forget the
and the lobsters, right? Lobsters. So what is it that's different? It's the types of and the textures of and the fullest expressions of the agapic orientation and all that stuff, right? So that's it. That is the other God.
Yeah. Oh, and a lot of it, I think, too, maybe he's pulling somewhat from Jung as well, with the whole kind of like integration of the shadow, but it's like almost the alchemical process of recovering desire, such that desire becomes lined up with the desire of God, or however you want to phrase it, the basic impulse of existence, and all these metaphors for describing it. So maybe that's one way of he's considering the transcendence. I don't know.
That would make sense, because I think his like 47th or maybe 48th lecture is on Jung. And especially if that's where he's going with transcendence, because that seems to map well with at least what I know of Jung, where the transcendent reality is like inwards. Like in order to reach heaven, I have to scour the depths of hell or something like that. Something like that with Jung. All right, this was a lot of fun.
Wait, let me finish on this. Since I've quoted Mormon scripture to you before, I might as well do it again because it's just relevant. So, this is regarding desire and faith. Let's say. So now, as I said concerning faith, that it was not a perfect knowledge. Even so, it is with my words. You cannot know of their surety at first unto perfection, any more than faith is a perfect knowledge. But behold, if you will awake and arouse your faculties, your meaning making, so, even to an experiment upon my words, and exercise a particle of faith, yea, even if ye can no more than desire to believe, let this desire work in you, even until you believe in a manner that you can give place for a portion of my words. And then he goes on to compare the words to a seed, and that your actions and your behaviors grow that seed, and then you taste the fruit at the end of that, and you discover if the seed that the person gave you, the word that you accepted, was true based on the outcome of the fruit. And that's how you find out whether or not they lied to you, essentially.
Yeah, that's the thing. You have to go through this long, drawn-out process.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you have to do it subjectively.
Oh, no. All right. Yes. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Big thanks to Craig. I have a link to his channel down below, as well as a link to our Discord and everybody else here, except for Tyler, who has no links to anything, except for the Discord. Everybody can
link
go join
myself
the Discord.
To the long narrative of the past.
Yes. You have a physical linkage that's going on. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks.
See you next week.
have a camera. Bye.